I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
And we're back. Summertime edition, June edition. We're June 4th here doing the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. As always, I'm your host, Bob Lung for Big Guy Fantasy Sports. And normally we have our good friend Ron Rigney. But you know what? We have another good friend of the site. Doesn't get to come on often. He's a very busy man. Got a wedding plans going on coming up this August. And that is one Colby Conway from Fantasy Alarm and, of course, Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Well, Colby, it's good to have you on, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And all it means is now we're back on talking a little bit of football. We're getting closer to not only the preseason, but more drafting. And then obviously once the season starts, Ron and I get involved with the consistently cashing here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. And hopefully you and I come back with the Prop It Like It's Hot article. I kind of missed that theme song a little bit, that intro song.
Yeah, I should have played it. I should have. We should have talked about it. But anyway, we will be back obviously this fall with Prop It Like It's Hot and giving you all the best prop bets from our prop bet consistency tool, which was very effective for us last year. Did a really nice job, made us some money, and that's always a good thing. But yeah, we're going to talk about tonight, obviously, the reason we're here. The reason we do this is the importance of consistency in fantasy football, and tonight's no different. One of course, our specialties is the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. The 2020 edition is out. You can get it on Amazon.com. The hard copy will come to you mailed directly from them. So they will print it and send it to you. In that will be a coupon code that you can use to get the VIP upgrade on the website. So you have all the free updates all season long for the guide, for the tier draft list, access to the consistency report that can put in your own scoring methods and get the most, find out who are the most consistent players in your league. So we definitely have that out there, so make sure you get that on Amazon.com. And Colby, tonight I thought we'd start with the quarterback position. It has certainly been an interesting one over the past few years. We're seeing almost more and more when we came out with the idea of kind of con streaming or consistency streaming. We thought it just makes a lot of sense that if you go and get maybe two good quarterbacks that you can kind of connect with their schedules, it might be better than grabbing a super high draft pick like a Lamar Jackson or a Patrick Mahomes. As we come into the season last year, we thought Mahomes was going to have another great season, but he got hurt a little bit and didn't live up to the standard of being a super high pick. What did happen was Lamar Jackson came out of nowhere and showed that he not only could be fantasy relevant with his feet, which we all knew was the thing, but he was very relevant with his arm, throwing over 30 touchdowns. So definitely this year we're seeing both of these guys going second round, third round type scenario. And, then it kind of drops off, and maybe the Kyler Murrays, Dak Prescott's, that kind of guys going fifth round, and then rounds 6 through 10, you've got all the old guys, I call it, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, etc. So we're going to break those down tonight. Last year, there were, for the second year in a row, 15 quarterbacks who threw for over 300 fantasy points. Even better than that was that it almost doubled the number of quarterbacks that were over 60% consistent. So we're seeing more consistency from the quarterback position, which is a good thing. We definitely like that because, you want to get a guy that's going to be, consistent for you. And you want somebody that's going to get those 20, 25 points for you every week. So without question, we look at that this year. So as we're looking at the 2020 preview in the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, once again, we see basically Tier 1, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. No surprises here. They both very talented, can put up a lot of fantasy points. Mahomes was kind of not at his peak last year, but he'll be 100% healthy. He certainly was struggling in the second half of the year and the playoffs with not running as much and not getting away from sacks as much. But he'll be healthy this year, and that just means more trouble for the defenses and even better for the people who draft him. What are your thoughts on Lamar and Patrick, and are you going to draft them in the second round? Do you feel comfortable you can make adjustments with the other players to get a top quarterback like that?
Yeah, quarterbacks kind of become a cup of tea. Like it's really a personal preference. Obviously, everyone's going to go, you want your running backs, you want your receivers early. Some people like to go for the quarterback to get that leg up. I know last year I was kind of out on Mahomes as QB1 because I didn't think he'd end there. Kind of worked out. Obviously, I still would have been great to have him. This year, the thing with Lamar Jackson is you kind of get a quarterback and a running back combined, because it's interesting with him throwing for 30 touchdowns. I mean, I didn't do this, but I just thought of this idea now. It'd really be interesting if you took out his rushing numbers, just in terms of his pure passing numbers, where he came last year. Because I know the yardage wasn't super high, but obviously those 36 touchdown passes to only 6 interceptions is going to be just fine for you. Right. I don't envision myself having either or any shares of really Lamar or Mahomes. I'd rather wait for that next tier, because that's where there's quite a few quarterbacks I really like, so I'm always fine with taking the one that falls. And one thing with Mahomes too is interesting. He always had Kareem Hunt, and he had a good pass catching running back. Not that Damian Williams isn't great, but with 11 games with Kareem Hunt, Patrick Mahomes about 30. This says about 34 fantasy points, and out of games when he didn't have Kareem Hunt, down to about 26. Is 26 bad? Absolutely not. But now, obviously, the Chiefs invested in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, a.k.a. Brian Westbrook 2.0, from what they're saying.
Right.
Give Mahomes yet another weapon. Good luck. You can't go wrong with either of those two. It's just, are you willing to pay that second or third round price, or even a top 5 pick if you're in super flex formats, because that's what you're going to have to use to get those guys there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely in the Superflex, and I've done a few of those already, especially Dynasty Superflex. So I've done 2, I'm in the middle of 2 Dynasty Superflex drafts. Yep. And the one, I think you know about this one, the one that I'm in it's going to be a 22 player, no, I'm sorry. Yes, I think it's a 22 starting lineup players. Why? Because it's also Superflex Dynasty full IDP. So you start 2 defensive tackles, 2 defensive ends, 2 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, and 3 linebackers. How about that? Wow. So needless to say, I've been pulling out all of my connections for IDP expertise, because I don't know shit about IDP. We do have the IDP consistency in the guide this year, which is fantastic. But the problem is that I didn't do it. Our good friends from Brazil Fantasy Football, put it together for us, and I used that, and so I'm making some picks. But yeah, it's boy, you want to talk about an eye opener? I'm like, because and here's the thing: the scoring method is so unique that when you go, so it's in My Fantasy League, so you know the site obviously very well, and so in My Fantasy League, you can put up the total stats from last year with the total fantasy points that you get, and you get who scored the most points last year. So in the top 10 are 4 defensive players. That's how much they've adjusted the scoring. So yeah, there was like 2 safeties and maybe a quarterback or something. So I was like, holy cow, this is going to be intense. So it's been fun. But anyway, so back to tier 1. Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, I've tried some best ball drafts where I've drafted both Lamar and Patrick in round 2 just to see what kind of team I could put together with that. And it isn't bad, obviously a lot of consistency, which you'd expect. So I like the team, but that's also a best ball draft, and so you can take those chances and make up for it with other scenarios and put that away. But so that's what's going on there. So now we move into the tier that most people are going to spend the most time looking at from a quarterback position, and that's our tier 2. And in that tier, we have, it's basically the remaining 10 NFL quarterbacks. So in our ranks, we've got Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Deshaun Watson, Josh Taylor, Tom Brady, Carson Wentz, and Jared Goff rounds out our top 12. I know who your favorite player is. I don't even have to ask. But why don't you talk about your man Deshaun Watson and how are you feeling about him this year? We've got Brandon Cooks instead of D-Hop, and some changes in the offense here. What are your thoughts on Deshaun? Are you feeling that love, that comfort you always have for him, or are you a little bit worried that he might regress just a tad?
So, interestingly enough, when you look at some of the numbers, we'll start with Watson. So this is that tier where I'm telling you there's about 5 guys in this tier that I like.
Right.
We'll start with Watson. Obviously, he is my favorite. Well, you have Dak in this tier, so I feel like he probably should have Dak above him just given the weapons. But I still prefer Deshaun. And actually, Deshaun passing wise slipped a bit last year. They lost D-Hop, yes. Mm-hmm. However, what I'll argue is that now he'll finally have a true slot receiver, rather than moving Will Fuller or DeAndre Hopkins in there with Randall Cobb, even though he's aging.
Right. Yeah, you've why don't you walk through that, because you brought up a really good point. We've had this discussion. So kind of tell the listeners about why Randall Cobb may be a good fantasy pick and is also a good benefit to Deshaun Watson that may most people aren't thinking about.
Yeah, so the thing with this is that basically what Houston did, and I don't know – I still love DeAndre Hopkins. I take him in the first round of multiple drafts, even he's not on the team anymore. Right. I don't know if, obviously it's contractually, that was part of it. I don't know if maybe Houston thinks he might have lost a step. I don't think he has, but they moved him into the slot a little bit more here and there to try to get him involved. Now what happens is, with him out of the equation, they need a slot receiver. It's not Keke QT. He's buried in Bill O'Brien's doghouse. I don't know if we'll ever see him again, to be honest. I thought he'd be traded before the draft. Right. But what's going to happen here, Randall Cobb, yes, he's old, and yes, he's maybe not quite what he once was. And I'm trying to get this pulled up because I actually just wrote some notes about Deshaun Watson for a piece I'll be writing here. But basically, if I'm not mistaken, Randall Cobb had like the 5th or 6th most receiving yards out of the slot last season. He's going to be a true slot receiver for that team. That's going to let Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks on the outside also mix in Kenny Stills with Duke Johnson and David Johnson. You could argue that this is the deepest group of weapons that Deshaun has ever had. Mm. And obviously Deshaun's going to run. That's right. Bill O'Brien loves to use him. He's going to get those carries inside the 5 and even in the red zone here. Yeah, so last year, Randall Cobb, 6th most yards out of the slot, 7th highest reception percentage from there. There's a lot of speed on this team, and he converted on just 49% of his air yards last season. So if the speed plays, I think he's going to be okay. I think in this tier, aside from Deshaun, can Deshaun be QB1 this year? I think so. I think his MVP season's incoming. If it's not this year, it's going to be next year. But Dak is obviously a guy, obviously adding CeeDee Lamb. He's got all the weapons there. Right. And then when you look past that, Kyler has the rushing ability. He gets D-Hop in a very pass-happy offense. Can't go wrong with Kyler. And the last two I'll point here, Josh Allen, obviously rushing ability. Give him Stephon Diggs. Carson Wentz is the guy who slips in drafts, and he's the one. I know there's injury concerns. I completely get it. But they're putting a NASCAR offense around him too, and the dude is incredibly gifted. If he stays healthy, he is easily the best value in this tier, especially looking here. 63% consistent last year. You have him ranked here at QB 11. No way, or no. There's no possibility that he couldn't be the QB 4 or 5 at the end of the year, especially if he runs a little bit more health willing.
Right. No, and I'm in agreement with all of them. And I noticed that the ones you didn't touch, we'll call them the old guys. Everybody over 30: Russell Wilson, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Tom Brady. I have a lot of love for them because, one, they're closer to my age. Number two, they're going in rounds 10, 11. So I've told people a lot of the, in a lot of the podcasts that I've done that I said, I've been basically loading up on, loading up on running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and then drafting Ryan and Breeze back-to-back in rounds 10, 11 or 9, 10. And, it's worked out pretty well for me. I feel like they're all good teams because I know that those two guys are going to put up good numbers. Now, one of them could get hurt, and that's why you get the other one. But they're going to throw. I mean, Ryan and Breeze both have to throw in those offenses. They play each other twice, so always a lot of passing going on in that division. So, I really like them. Russell Wilson's the only one that scares me just because he's going too soon in drafts. His 56% consistency last year was just almost dumbfounding because the weird thing was he always started off really slow in the past. And then last year he started off super fast in the beginning and went like 5 out of 6 and then turned around and just sucked. I mean, he was like 50% consistent the rest of the year, and it was very, like I said, just almost disappointing. So a lot of, and the thing was, he ended the year ranked 4th in total points. So a lot of people see the 4th in total points and go, well, Russell Wilson had just a typical year, top 5. Yeah, but that's why we do the consistency numbers, to show that he was not as helpful to your teams at that point that he should have been. And in the past, he's always been around 70, 75. So I feel like he'll have a bounce back, but they didn't really go out and get any new weapons, unless you call Carlos Hyde that. But, they're going to rely on Chris Carson, the running game, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, maybe Greg Olsen, hopefully, mostly because Will Dissly won't be back until maybe end of September from what Dr. Brandon Bowers said last week when he was on. So if you're thinking about Will Dissly getting back for the season to start, he doesn't think it's going to happen. So definitely keep an eye on that. But I think all of these guys have potential to put up solid numbers. I think this year is one of the years that you really can wait on a quarterback and get a good, consistent one out of it. Even Tom Brady, who certainly had a terrible year last year from his perspective, going to those kind of weapons around him, it's certainly going to be a productive year for him with having Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, O.J. Howard, Cameron Brate, all those guys. So, should be good. Ronald Jones, I think, will benefit as well. So I think all the quarterbacks certainly have a lot of potential there. Are there any in that group that you just won't draft? Now, I know you'll draft Deshaun Watson and everyone. So I shouldn't say that because you'll never draft any of those guys other than Deshaun Watson. But
yeah,
is there anybody that's just like, even if you're sitting in round 10, you're like, I don't have a quarterback yet. Do I draft Jared Goff? Do I draft Tom Brady? Is there anybody you're just like, I'm probably, or they're too high, maybe a Prescott, Wilson, rounds, 4 or 5, are you going to take a chance and go there?
Yeah, if we're gonna incorporate draft capital in, I'm probably gonna be out on Russell Wilson only because I like his weapons, which is nice. However, it's a run-first team, becomes a little bit touchdown dependent, and I don't know. They just seem to. I'm pretty sure sometime this offseason they've released an offensive lineman who was actually pretty good. So can't imagine he has much protection in terms of just on a talent level. I want to be in on Tom Brady in Tampa Bay with Bruce Arians because they're going to throw all the time. Mm-hmm. And I like Jared Goff. They're going to run the football a little bit more, which I think will help him, to be honest. I think when they tried to go 3 wide receivers all the time, he struggled a bit, and the O-line was horrible. Right. In terms of price, I'm probably out on Russell Wilson. I would probably still draft Tom Brady over Jared Goff. When it comes to Jared Goff, if he's going to be my quarterback, I'm waiting until a player that you have in tier 4 that I'm pushing up and actively getting him. So gotcha. Call that a tease.
All right, and tease it is. Real quick, so tier 3, don't have a lot of guys. I don't think there's a lot of QB2As. If I have to pick 2, I put Stafford and Tannehill in there, both because, hey, they were both 75% consistent in their limited time. Tannehill was actually even better than that. He really didn't kick into about the 3rd game in. Then I think he ripped off like 7 or 8 straight. But then what I saw in the playoffs scared me a little bit for putting him too high, because then it was just very obvious that when Derrick Henry was running wild like he did in the playoffs in some of those games, it was certainly a point where Tannehill, didn't he throw for under 100 yards in one of the games that they won, I think, or something like that? Maybe it was a 150. So it kind of scares me that he could go into a game and he may not have to throw the ball because Derrick Henry will rush for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's the only thing that scares me about Tannehill. I love Stafford. I mean, I think he's one of those guys, if you want to move up into tier 2 easily, you take Stafford in rounds like 12, 13. I definitely draft him as backup in a lot of things so far. So any thoughts on these 2 guys? And, do you have any love for them?
Yeah, not as much Tannehill. Definitely with Stafford, though. He was a QB1 up until his injury last year. Like, I'm looking here at his fantasy points, and through week 8, he was the QB9, and he already had his bye week in there. So he had only played 7 games up to that point. Only players ahead of him that had 7 games within that span were Lamar, Dak, Mahomes and Matt Ryan. So basically, if you want to look at that, he was kind of the QB5 almost.
Right.
So definitely in on Stafford more so than Tannehill. The only thing that benefits Tannehill is that his division boasts some bad secondaries. Houston's secondary isn't great, Indy's isn't great, and Jacksonville's they're bad too.
Yeah.
They're bad all around. At least Houston and Indy have some talent at some places. Jacksonville's kind of a mess.
Right.
So he at least has a good division that he gets to feast on. But yeah, you're right. That's a Derrick Henry offense with Tannehill mixing it in every now and again. So more so Stafford for me in that tier.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's move on to the tier 4. A lot of quarterbacks in there. A lot of surprises of good quarterbacks. At least we think they're good. This is quarterbacks 15 through 24, so our QB2Bs. And Aaron Rodgers in there. Ben Roethlisberger's in there. Of course, he got injured, so it's kind of hard to fault him. I even have Joe Burrow in there as a rookie, which I think, obviously he's the starter, so I think he has easily the potential to, put up at least top 24 numbers in the quarterback position. Other than that, there may be some guys in here, like I might draft Rodgers, but the problem is Rodgers is still going in like round 6 and 7. He's not even falling back with Breeze and Ryan in the late single digits, not 8, 9, 10. But you said, you have a guy that you might move up to tier 2 here. So I'm intrigued to know who that is.
I'm curious if I'll give you a guess or two. Let's see if you can guess it. If you took note of the recent draft that we were in, you'll have a good idea.
Then I'm going to go with Danny Dimes.
Yep,
Daniel
that's
Jones.
exactly who it is.
All right.
He has a complement of weapons. He's going to have Saquon. He's going to have Evan Engram, fingers crossed. Sterling Shepard, fingers crossed. Darius Slayton and Golden Tate. So I'm looking here at Danny Dimes here, just looking at his numbers from last year. So using Pro Football Focus's numbers, 0.47 fantasy points per dropback, 14th best in the league, just behind Kyler Murray. He actually runs more. Now, the only problem is he did lose 18 fumbles, he fumbled 18 times last year, lost 11. That's something that's going to have to get picked up. The one thing to note with him, final 8 weeks of the season, he had 3 games with at least 4 touchdown passes. And after week 8, he averaged about 270 passing yards per game with 2.5 touchdowns. So if he can keep that up and keep the turnovers down, I think the Giants, they want to run the football with Saquon, but they're going to want to throw it with all of those weapons. If Danny Dimes runs, holds onto the football, and doesn't turn things over, he's going to push to be a top 10 quarterback this season. I firmly believe that. I have leagues where he's my QB1 in a dynasty super flex that I'm in. He is my quarterback 2 behind Deshaun Watson. So I went with Deshaun and Danny.
Gotcha.
Very big on Danny Dimes this season. Look to get a lot of shares of him, if not as my starter, because I waited. I love grabbing him as a backup because a lot of people, when you look at this tier, depending on who you're drafting with, eyes are going to go to Baker Mayfield with OBJ and Jarvis Landry. And then obviously Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers have pedigree. Joe Burrow and Drew Lock are probably sexier picks than Daniel Jones. But production is there. And this year, or in 2020, that 38% clutch rate from 2019 for Danny Jones, hopefully that's pushing more 65-70% this season.
Interesting. All right. Well, yeah, I did notice that in our auction draft that Colby and I are in together. He was certainly putting in some money for DJ there, and so that's cool. And it's like I said, there's a lot of interesting players. If you throw in Jones, Mayfield, Rodgers, Roethlisberger, maybe even Rivers, depending, you have basically 5 quarterbacks that could easily make the top 20, top 12 if they just get things together. Aaron Rodgers was 11th in total points. Consistency wasn't there. Mayfield was 18th, and Rivers was 14th. So they both have the potential that, Mayfield has a much better offensive line to work with now. So that certainly has been a big factor. So in Roethlisberger being healthy, he was top 12 2 years ago when he was healthy. So all these guys have potential to get in there, which means some of the guys in the top 12 are going to get moved out. Like I said, I think, we could see a lot of quarterbacks being over 300 points this year without question. So definitely love that from that scenario. The bottom guys, Cousins, Garoppolo, and Darnold, had their moments in some games. Certainly had some flashes. You go, ooh, hey, maybe. And then, the reason we do the consistency, you have a big game and then you come back with 2 clunkers. We know Cousins is so much loved that they raided stores in Minneapolis and they left all his jerseys behind. So that was helpful. So that shows you the love they have for him in Minnesota. But do you see any of these guys maybe even breaking into tier 3?
I guess Garoppolo.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, I don't feel great about either of these 3. In that dynasty superflex I'm in, Darnold's my QB3, and I'm trying to trade him every day.
Right.
It's just his thing is not necessarily. Well, I mean, talent. He's talented. It's just Adam Gase. You never know.
Yeah,
he's just a guy I'm out on. Jimmy Garoppolo relies on his guys making plays after the catch, which is luckily he has George Kittle. They added Brandon Ayuk. They have Deebo Samuel, so they do have some athletes there. And Minnesota runs through Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins throwing to Dalvin Cook and mixing in a little Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Adding him does help a little bit for Cousins, but, 47% clutch rate last season. And I think when you look back through the years, I don't necessarily think Cousins is necessarily a beacon of consistency.
Right.
47, 44, and 56 in the past 3 years. So nothing great there. Yeah, I'm kind of out on these guys. Cousins had some big point years, but the consistency hasn't been there. He's no more than your backup.
Gotcha. All right, so good preview there. Just looking at our top 24 quarterbacks. Let's move into X consistency. And for those listeners maybe new to the program, new to the consistency world, maybe you haven't got your guide yet. X consistency basically gives you the ability to help us kind of fine-tune the consistency model. If you play fantasy baseball, XERA is kind of similar. It kind of fine-tunes the ERA to see if they're really pitching well or not pitching well. And that's what this X consistency is here to do, is for the guys that have played limited games, so they're not up there in total points. We're taking their fantasy points per game, multiplying times their clutch rate to kind of get their X consistency, we call it. And it kind of separates those guys who, may be good, may look good on paper, but you look at that number and go, dropped off a little bit. And in our article inside the guide, we compare Matthew Stafford and Deshaun Watson. And we're not saying that Matthew Stafford's better than Deshaun Watson. What we're showing is what a value Stafford was for the first half of the year when he was playing. His X consistency was actually a little bit better than Matthew Stafford's, and end of the year ranked 3rd in X consistency, Deshaun at 4th. Colby, from your perspective, as you look at, let's say, the top 12, are there guys in there that kind of surprised you being in there? Because this is a different model. It's not all consistency. It does have some points involved in to get to this number. Any surprises in there that you see?
I mean, obviously Stafford being 3, I know he was good. But that just shows how really good he was, and Ryan Tannehill to even be in there at 7th is interesting. And the thing to kind of reiterate, and you've said this, so basically I'll just word it a little bit differently, is that with this model, this isn't the beacon to go by. And I know that that's not what you're saying. So basically in your drafts, you don't want to draft Stafford as a 3rd quarterback off the board.
No, exactly. Ahead of it's Watson, just showing that how valuable he was in those games.
Sure.
Right.
For sure. And what it shows too is if you get to, maybe you're in the, I don't know, it's like the 7th or 8th round of your draft when you're looking at these guys, and it comes down to, all right, so I see, I'm looking at Matt Ryan and his ADP is there. And when you look at X consistency, Carson Wentz is only a couple spots back, and I might be able to wait a couple more rounds for him. Right, so that's where you can kind of use it to kind of pick and choose your options. Or if you're, I personally like this the best for when I'm looking for maybe not even my starter, because most of the time I'm going to get my guys who are going to be my starters. But you can use this X consistency model here to look at, all right, so when I'm looking at backups, so obviously Ryan Tannehill pretty high on X consistency, his metric last year, and he's going pretty late in drafts. Same with a guy like Jameis, even though he's a backup now. But Gardner Minshew's there at 16th, and he's being drafted way after quarterback 16. So, and even Danny Dimes down there at 23. So I always like looking at these X consistency marks to see what guys are going to be my backups, just because I can use this model to see how effective they were essentially on a per game basis, and then know that I have some position stability.
Right, definitely. As we looked at the second section there, ranks 13 through 24, I mean, I think that kind of surprised me was seeing Kyler Murray being a little bit lower than expected. One of the things that I kind of showed in the guide in the actual profile of Kyler Murray was his second half wasn't as strong as his first. I don't know if teams are starting to figure him out. I know that their run game got a lot better because obviously, Kenyon Drake came in, started running the ball well, so he didn't have to throw as much. That one game against the Browns, what do you have, 3 touchdowns? So I don't know if Kyler Murray threw the ball hardly at all that game. So definitely looked a lot better. So he certainly had his moments, but like I said, adding D-Hop and, they're going to be on fire this year. There's no question about it. Tom Brady being way down, obviously Trubisky, not a surprise. And even Daniel Jones being low, that was a little surprising. I thought he had some better overall per game numbers, but still not bad and still gives you something to look at. So as we kind of head to the last kind of 14, 15 minutes here, let's kind of just take a look at the profiles, to kind of look at the values, especially from a, ADP standpoint. And, we start off with Josh Allen. As we've shown above, he was ranked 9th in total points, 9th in consistency. So going to QB7 pretty much puts him at value. Adding Stephon Diggs should help the passing attack as a whole. But it's still going to come down to Devin Singletary, making sure he stays healthy to have a strong running game, keep them in the game. Josh Allen certainly makes up a lot of, fantasy numbers with his feet as well, just kind of, not as much as Lamar Jackson, but certainly puts up the numbers. Where are you on Josh Allen when it comes to value from a drafting standpoint? I mean, where are you going to have to be at in the draft? Let's say somebody takes Deshaun in the 3rd round, so they catch you off guard, so now you can't get Deshaun. Is there a point where Josh Allen is at a right spot for you and these other guys are gone that you go like, okay, round 6 and these guys are gone, Josh Allen I would be okay with him at that spot?
Yeah, typically it'll be a couple rounds after a guy like Deshaun. That's where I'm looking at with him. One thing that I'm worried about with Allen, I like the addition of Diggs. That should help. Maybe, right. Allen's going to have to get more accurate. One thing to note is that the Jets' defense is okay at best. Miami's secondary is very good. They spent money on those cornerbacks with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard coming back from injury. And obviously New England's defense is still good. That division is not as good as it once was offensively with Brady leaving and kind of that whole regime. But the defenses are strong, and when you look at Josh Allen's here, let me scroll down on my screen here. But, against good defenses, his consistency hasn't been great. When you look at home and away, he's just 5 for 11 in 2018 and 2019 against some of those good defenses. And this year, Miami's defense will be good. New England's defense will be good. It's going to be some tough goes there. That's 4 games. That's 25% of his season that he's going up against good defenses. We're just talking about division games. So that's one thing to note with Josh Allen. I'm fine with him around QB7. He's not a guy I'm pushing up though.
Gotcha. All right, let's scroll down to your guy Danny Dimes. In the profile, I bring up the fact that on top of the fact, as you explained, there were 13 games last year that he did not have Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram. So from that standpoint, like you said, getting all those weapons back, getting them healthy, and let's be honest, Saquon Barkley wasn't healthy. He was missing games and not performing as well after that ankle injury. He came back a little quicker than even some of us thought he should. So, after that, any more thoughts, as you looked at Daniel Jones, I think you pretty much, put it all in perspective for us. But, like I said, definitely a good backup. And maybe if you wait long enough, could be your starter. But getting a couple of those guys in the late rounds is certainly going to help.
Yeah, it's interesting too, just looking at it. He only had, I'm using the RotoViz game splits tool as an app, or a tool that I really like to use here. And just looking at this, put in Danny Jones, put in players that also played Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, just one game where he had those guys.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, that's something to consider. It's very interesting to see what he can do with those guys. There's plenty of weapons on that team now that, other than Houston, that might be one of the more, health dependent crews in terms of skill players, because obviously they have a lot of injuries too. But no, Danny Dimes, if the only thing that scares me when I wait for him as my QB1 is I better be damn sure I hit on every other position, because I'm going to need that, especially if he doesn't quite elevate like I think he will here in 2020.
Gotcha. All right, as we scroll down the profiles to my hometown boy, Mr. Baker Mayfield. Obviously, a lot of hype last year, a lot of love. Even I fell into the love, and I'm usually not I don't draft Cleveland people because I don't want to get the double burn of not only my fantasy team sucking but my regular team sucking. I'm used to my regular team sucking. But I did. I drafted Mayfield in some. Obviously, I got Nick Chubb in some, which was helpful. Drafted Beckham in some. That didn't work out. Drafted Landry in some. That was actually not too bad. But as we look at Mayfield, we've got not a whole new team. We have the same team. We have a whole new coaching staff. We have Stefanski, who came over from the Vikings. Looks like he's kind of trying to build the a Vikings team in Cleveland. He went out and got another, he got Austin Hooper to go along with David Njoku, so he got 2 tight ends, hence Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith Jr. He obviously has the wide receivers, so he's good there. He's got Nick Chubb, he's got Kareem Hunt, but the key was they went out and got some offensive linemen. They got Jack Conklin from the Tennessee Titans, and then with their first-round pick, drafted the kid, is it Wills out of Alabama. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, we have an offensive line. Is it enough to make pick Baker up? Let's say he gets at least up and maybe close to the top 12, definitely be more consistent, but more importantly, he's going to win football games. That's what we care about in Cleveland. But from a fantasy perspective, is he going to be worth getting as your QB1, or is this guy definitely a backup and you hope he turns it around and maybe becomes your starter, or possibly be a good trade bait?
Yeah, I think he can be your QB1 this season to lead your team. Looking here last year, 8 games when Kareem Hunt played, he did average 6 more fantasy points per game with Hunt on the field. He's a guy they're only going to use more. Only thing that worries me that kind of goes against that is once Kareem Hunt actually came back, Cleveland threw the football less and actually operated under one of the league's slowest paces upon Kareem Hunt's return. So they want to run the football and then let Baker mix it in there. No doubt to run first football team with. They're going to pass more than they run, but they want to run the football with Nick Chubb. They're going to get Kareem Hunt involved. They do have plenty of talents. They added in Austin Hooper to be basically to be Baker's Kyle Rudolph that he's always had for so long in Minnesota. So there's a lot to like. I think he can get there to QB1. He just needs to. Fortunately, this season it seems like there's not as many commercials with Baker, so maybe there's a little bit more focus. I can't speak to that.
He has come out,
but that is in play.
Right. So he has come out publicly and said he is not going to do that this year. He's going to focus on football. He is not going to focus on commercials. He's not going to focus on limelight. He's going to get the job done, and this is what he's saying. And he's going to, and I guess OBJ has been participating in team meetings on Zoom, and so that has been a new focus. So we'll see.
And it's interesting with Baker too, because if I'm not mistaken, this is his third year. This 2020 will be his third year in the league, right?
Right.
Because he was 2018, 2019, now 2020.
Right.
Stefanski's in there. There's a lot of new faces in there. If Baker doesn't perform, or if they don't think he's the guy,
right,
they've made the coaching changes, they could move on. So you could almost view this as a prove-it year for Baker,
whether
whether he's going to get an extension or if he's destined for a fifth-year option.
Right. And do you remember who they went out and got as their backup quarterback?
Is
Casey
it Keenum?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And where was Keenum whenever Stefanski was coaching the Vikings? His starting quarterback. So obviously he brought that guy in to say, you know what? Yeah, I've lived with this before. I can do this. So yeah. So we'll see. So yeah, I think Baker needs to do it. So all right, we got about a little over 5 minutes left here. So let's kind of scroll down. Anybody in the profiles you want to talk about? Maybe talk about where they're at, where their ADP is, what you like or don't like about them?
Yeah, actually, I won't go too far down for this one, just because it's interesting. And I kind of said that Jacksonville stinks, and they
right.
do, and they will. But Gardner Minshew's a guy I'm looking at too. I actually paid $3 for him in the auction draft that you and I are doing,
right?
And he was good last year. They can throw the football. I really like Laviska Shenault for that team. I think he's going to be a big piece of that offense as long as they can get him in there and get him up to speed.
Right.
Yes, in your profile you mentioned about how Minshew kind of faded off after a hot start. Then again, he wasn't expected to be at all in the lineup last year. It was Foles'
and they let
offense,
Foles walk, right?
And Chicago traded for him, believe it or not. But yes, Foles isn't there. It's Minshew. He's the only guy there. Like he can move a little bit too. Like he can put up some fantasy points with his legs. And believe it or not, last year he was better statistically against good defenses than bad defenses. Interestingly enough, when you see his profile there, so he's a guy I love to get as a QB2 or QB3. And if you're in super flex formats, I love him as a QB3.
Yeah, no question. It definitely had, and he started off like wildfire. I mean, he started off with, 7 out of 8 clutch games. And, everybody's kind of like scratching their head like, what the heck is going on here? But yeah, definitely had a great year. Let's scroll down and let's talk about Dak again. Last year, second in total points. He put up 81% consistency, which ranked him second overall. His ADP is QB5. We have him at QB3. I have Prescott over Watson only because I'm not you. But you even said you would probably put it that way just because they added weapons, which is surprising, by going out and getting CeeDee Lamb in the draft. At number 17 overall. So they've got the fantasy locus, Amari Cooper, Gallup, Zeke, Blake Jarwin at tight end, which isn't much. And now we've got CeeDee Lamb. Can he improve on his numbers? I guess that is the key. I think if he matches last year's numbers, I think we'd all be happy if we're drafting him. But can he improve on those numbers? That's the question. I'm going to say no. I think he'll be close, but I don't think he can improve because he did stuff that he hasn't done in ever, his career year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because basically, where you're drafting him, you almost need him to, at worst, match what he did last year.
Right.
And it's one of those things where, like, yes, CeeDee Lamb is an exciting young rookie coming in, and he's going to be the slot. But like I mentioned with Watson earlier, Randall Cobb was really good for that team last year, believe it or not, in terms of the numbers he accrued out of the slot. And obviously, don't get me wrong, Lamb is way more athletically gifted. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Yes, if you're asking me from my heart, I'll put Watson before Prescott, but with my mind and with my brain, I'm going to put Prescott ahead of Watson. I think he can get better. It's going to be something where he's going to need to continue to throw the ball and match those numbers. And what we're going to need is just a couple of times, don't hand the ball to Zeke and let him run it in. Those rushing touchdowns for Dak are going to be key just to give you that little extra bump to push him up more because you get 6 points for those. So I think he can do it. I think he's getting a little inflated in his ADP, and I think I'm going to get priced out soon because if I'm not mistaken, it continues to rise, and he's continuing to be pushed up. And he's the trendy QB1 pick heading into 2020. He'll be drafted after Lamar and Mahomes, obviously, but if it's not Lamar or Mahomes finishing the year as QB1, Dak is the trendy pick right now.
All right, we got minute 45. I got question of the year here for you. Who do you think has a better fantasy season, assuming they play all 16 games? Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger?
I will go with Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger at least is happy-ish.
Okay.
You could say. I don't know. Aaron Rodgers is upset. He's upset. They have all those running backs now. It seems like they really want to run the football.
Right.
It's still Ben's team. He's going to throw the football. I love the Steelers receivers this year, headlined by Juju.
Right.
I know Ben Roethlisberger has the well-documented home and away struggles, but give me Ben.
Right. And actually, Ben got a little bit better the year before and kind of picked it up a little bit. In fact, if you look at his numbers, now his 3-year averages is actually better away than it is home. So he has turned it around over the last couple of years. So he used to be atrocious away versus home, but certainly has picked that up. So, all right, well, obviously, Colby, thank you again for being a part of our show. Always love to have you when you're available. But tell everybody where they can find you. We got about 35 seconds.
Yep, on Twitter at Colby R. Conway. Obviously do some writing over at Fantasy Alarm, and once we get closer to the season, definitely see my name popping up more here at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, so looking forward to it.
Perfect. All right. Thank you again for being a part of this. Of course, take care. Stay safe, and let's see what the next thing happens. But we hope we can get back to semi-normal here at the end. So for Colby Conway, I am Bob Lung. Thanks for being part of this. Have a great week.